In the thriving post-World War II baby boom era in the 1950s, there was a push to build a children's zoo in South Bend, Indiana. Plans were made, budgets presented, the people were excited. But in 1955, the county tax board slashed money from the budget and voted down any hopes of a children's zoo. Many were upset at this negative vote, and it sparked the community into action. Spearheaded by a local civic organization, the community raised enough dollars and volunteer labor to build a storybook-themed children's zoo in the middle of South Bend's Rum Village Park. It would be named Storyland Zoo, and for almost a quarter century, from 1957 until 1981, over 1 million children and families built lasting memories of this once special place that today is simply a wooded area that bears no evidence of the magic that many once enjoyed here. Thank you for watching another Round the Bend Now and Then video. My name is Matt Emery and I am a local history nerd. My main mission with the Round the Bend material is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. Before we dive into the content of the video, I want to remind you to check out episodes of our audio podcasts that are available wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, and now even on the exact same channel that you're watching, YouTube. In the podcast, you'll learn all about South Bend and Mishawaka areas now and then as I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. Now, let's dive into another video that helps tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. I have a very faint memory as a young kid in the mid-1980s going to Rum Village Nature Center one day with my dad. Driving away, I saw what looked like a bunch of abandoned animal enclosures, and I remember being so intrigued by these enclosures. They looked so sad, with the overgrowth all around them, and even being the young 7 or 8-year-old that I was, I could tell that that whole area looked like it had served a purpose at one time. My dad had explained to me that there was once a very popular children's petting zoo there when he was a kid, Storyland Zoo. And from there, I've always been intrigued by this Storyland Zoo. Since then, the internet. Over the years, there have been many really neat pictures of Storyland Zoo circulating online, on the Facebook history pages, and South Bend Tribune articles that show Storyland Zoo in its heyday, bustling with action, families having a blast. I want to create a video that presents all of those cool pictures, but also a bit more. I want to provide some context behind the pictures and learn more about Storyland Zoo. I want to tell the story of a once magical place that is now long gone to history. A place that is now mostly an area of woods in Rum Village Park that bears almost zero clues to what once stood here. Rum Village continues to buzz with activity, but probably nothing like it did from 1957 until 1981. In this video, I hope to tell the story of Storyland Zoo, utilizing dozens of historical pictures, over 100 South Bend Tribune articles, on-the-scene videos of present-day area recorded and narrated by yours truly, as well as a classic, timeless home video from the late 1960s. And speaking of these home video clips, I want to extend my sincere gratitude and thanks up front to the Jerry V. Limbert family for allowing me to share. As you'll see later on in this video, it truly captures the joy that Storyland Zoo once brought. Thank you once again for sharing this treasure. And for those of us, myself included, that never saw Storyland Zoo, I hope that this video adds to your collective knowledge of our local history, and I hope that you learn something new. For those of you who got to experience it, I truly hope that this video sparks precious memories of yesteryear. Thank you to everyone who has shared these pictures and their stories online and on the various Facebook history pages. Thank you to the History Museum for your treasure trove of old pictures. And thank you to Gary Harrington, the director of the Rum Village Nature Center, for meeting with this crazy guy and sharing your knowledge of the area. South Bend, Indiana was no different than any other American city in the years after World War II. Soldiers were returning from war and starting families, and you can imagine neighborhoods were bursting at the seams with kids playing. During this time, in the mid 1950s, the city of South Bend and its citizens wanted to create something fun for all of the children to do. So they hatched a plan to create a storybook themed children's zoo. Plans were made, the public was all for it, and a location was selected, right in the middle of Rum Village Park in the southwest side of South Bend. Rum Village Park itself is steeped in interesting history. I'd like to do a whole episode on the park itself, but here is a very, very brief history of it. The park sits on 160 acres of rolling hills that were formed by glaciers during the last ice age some 15,000 years ago. A Native American village once inhabited the land. The village was named after its Potawatomi chief, Tow Rum, and most likely was once called Tow Rum's Village, and then was called Rum's Village for some time. And get this, in the 1820s, the land was specified in treaties between the United States government and the Potawatomi, and it's actually officially documented as Rum's Village. Andrew Jackson himself signed the deed transfer, and at some point, it simply was called Rum Village. From there are documented interviews with some of South Bend's original settlers who talk about Rum's Village and how it was abandoned in the fall of 1831. The Potawatomi were never to be seen again. Obviously, sadly, this most likely had something to do with the government policy of Native American removal. But these early settlers, they saw some crazy stuff in Rum's Village. They discovered burial grounds with hollowed out logs containing the bodies of infants, and possibly the body of Tow Rum himself, propped up, dressed and seated on the ground, still looking over his village. After the government treaties, the land of Rum's Village changed hands multiple times, including one of the Studebaker brothers, Peter, who had a farm on some of the land. And even then, they'd still find old Native American artifacts on the land. At some point in the early 1900s, as South Bend was growing, there was a push to not let the rolling hills of Rum Village be subdivided and developed into a neighborhood. So there was a push to keep it as it was, a beautiful wooded area and fun for the kids with sledding, etc. Multiple different civic groups and community members were pushing for Rum Village to become a city park. And in 1916, the city took control of the land and started making payments. And what was once a Native American village was now a public park. Fast forward 40 years later, in 1955, there was a huge public push to build a children's zoo in South Bend, and Tow Rum's Village was the site. Before we go any further, I want to point out where Storyland Zoo was located within Rum Village Park, so you have some context throughout. And I would assume that when they started to build it, it looked like the wooded area that it is today. And you can't tell as much from this aerial here, but today, those woods are pretty thick around the old zoo location. The community was excited about the plans to build a children's zoo with a storybook-themed setting. Public officials held meetings and even traveled to Detroit to check out their children's zoo. And anyone who has seen the entrance building to our Storyland Zoo, check out where they got the inspiration for it. But you know that it didn't come without drama at first. The park department included $34,000, that's almost $400,000 in today's dollars, in their proposed budget to build the children's zoo. And when it came to budget approval time, the money allocated to building the zoo was slashed from the park department's budget. The tax board saved the average South Bend citizen a whopping 50 cents. And if I'm reading the tea leaves right in all of the newspaper articles at the time, people were not happy at all. Editorials by the Tribune, Letter after letter to the editor were written expressing disappointment in the decision, and this seemed to cause the community to dig their heels in deeper, and they were determined to have their story-themed children's zoo in Rum Village. A local civic organization, the JCs, were asked by the Parks Department to help lead the building of the zoo. So when the news came down about the budget cut, they were miffed. They knew that this zoo was important to improve the city and more attractive for prospective employees of local businesses. From that point forward, the president of the South Bend JCs, James W. Oberfell, was front and center in the now double-down push to build the children's zoo. The year of 1956 would be the year of raising funds and recruiting volunteers to build that zoo. Oberfell started the push by writing in the paper that the JCs would, quote, direct all income from our activities towards this. By next fall, we hope to give a sizable check to the park board so that their next budget can be smaller. We surely hope that the people of South Bend will support this program. Support the program they did. Throughout 1956, I found article after article after article advertising fundraisers, zoo drives, pledge sheets, organizations volunteering their time to build structures for the zoo, schools raising money, and overall progress on the work in the zoo. The community that was bursting with children truly rallied behind the creation of their own children's zoo. It was a true community collaboration. From that point forward until opening day in June of 1957, you just about could not open the South Bend Tribune without reading something about the progress at Storyland Zoo. Here is the layout of the plans for the zoo. As you can see, there are many structures, cages, and pathways to be built. And remember, this was a community volunteer effort, so varied labor unions and organizations chipped in their resources and expertise to literally build the zoo. For example, members of the Bricklayers Union laid the foundation for varied zoo buildings, including the often pictured entrance building. Bendix Local 9 actually constructed the entrance building in rotating shifts. The Fraternal Order of Police raised the funds for a model locomotive for kids to climb and take pictures in. It was also the locomotive for a train of animal cages. The Chamber of Commerce built the Jimmy Crack Corn Crow Roost. The South Bend Firemen were on fire. They built a 2-scale model of the zoo, a parrot cage, and the actual hickory-dickory dock clock. As the year turned to 1957, excitement was building for summertime, as the community knew that their very own storybook-themed children's zoo, Storyland Zoo, would be opening at Rum Village Park. And after all the budget-slashing drama, the fundraising, the planning, the volunteering, the construction, and all of the excitement and buildup, in June of 1957, Storyland Zoo opened to the public. And for the next 24 years, it was the center of fun for many area children and families. Countless parents making their children pose on the various attractions, kids clamoring to pet and prod goats, sheep, and other lucky animals, train rides darting up and down and weaving in and out and through the hills and trees of the park. But most importantly, the place that still makes those that visited it smile when they think about the innocence of their own childhood all of those years ago. And now, a brief word from one of our sponsors. I want to thank In Rug Co. for helping to support our content. If you've never heard of In Rug Co., let me tell you. Indiana Rug Company started in 1985 right here in the South Bend and Mishawaka area, specializing in custom handmade area rugs. And almost 30 years later, they're still going strong. They're still creating beautiful, one-of-a-kind area rugs and offering other carpet binding services. But they've grown into so much more. They opened a brick-and-mortar retail store, In Rug Co. Studio and Gift Shop, located at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue in Mishawaka, right across from the entrance to Central Park. In Rugco itself is located in a cool, old, historic Mishawaka storefront, but what's inside is even better. I can pretty much tell you that any fan of this podcast and other Round the Bend content would be a fan of In Rugco, as the first thing that caught my attention as soon as I walked inside was the selection of locally themed merchandise. I mean, where else are you going to find Scottsdale Mall or USA Skate Center merch or a t-shirt that says Michiana versus everybody? Nowhere. The whole front of the store contains locally themed t-shirts, coffee mugs, magnets, stickers, and much more. Now that's the area that you had to drag me out of. Then there are other areas in the store that I literally had to drag my wife out of. It seemed like she had a gift picked out for everybody. For our moms, our sisters, and our nieces, she found some really cool purses, aprons, jewelry, artwork, and other neat decorations. For our sons and nephews, she found some stylish outdoor gear and clothes. And once I dragged her out of that area, I discovered that they have a really cool outside patio area where you can buy one-of-a-kind yard decorations, wind chimes, patio art, and more. Then, when you're tired from all the shopping and need something sweet to eat, look no further than Lola's Pastry Bread and Jam Bakery, located right inside of In Rugco. All of their sweet treats are baked from 100% scratch using no preservatives. To truly get a sense of all that In Rugco has to offer, you have to visit their store. Again, at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue, across from the Central Park entrance. Once you're there, you'll understand why I'm describing this place so enthusiastically and why I'm so excited that I get to advertise for them, as they are a locally owned small family business who is entrenched in our community and dedicated to seeing it thrive. I think their own description of In Rugco says it all. If you are tired of big box retail stores without personality and artistic flair, our studio offers a true shopping experience with genuine customer engagement and service. And folks, go to their website, indianarugco.com, to check out all that they have to offer. After its inaugural season in 1957, things were looking up for Storyland Zoo. Attendance hit 100,000, and little Stevie here even earned a lifetime pass for being the 100,000th guest. As this 1957 Park Board of Commissioners annual report touts, how this community project, spearheaded by the JCs, was successful beyond their fondest dreams. It thanked all of those involved for making it happen. It noted a total income of $10,500. And if you recall, the tax board would not approve a mere $35,000 from the budget. The zoo could make that back in about 3 or 4 summers. And they did. As each year into the 1960s, the Park Board of Commissioners' annual reports touted nothing but glowing reports and figures. As you can see, attendance was in the 70 to 80 thousands by 1968. And that is around the time that this absolute treasure of a family video was filmed, when Storyland Zoo was in full swing. The family begins by walking through the entrance building, a building that saw over 1 million people walk through its doors over the zoo's 24-year existence. From there, you'll see a family simply having fun together. Thank you again to the Jerry V. Limbert family for graciously allowing me to include this in the video. In an era where there were only 3 television channels, no video games, no internet, no cell phones and tablets to keep our eyes glued on, you can see how much fun that they were having at Storyland Zoo. Sadly, however, I would say that this is about the peak of Storyland Zoo, as a little more than a decade later, in 1981, it closed. Before we get to that, however, I want to share a few of the ups and downs, some amusing, some not, that I found in my research on Storyland Zoo. And in researching a children's petting zoo, you definitely go down some rabbit holes. And speaking of rabbit holes, Storyland Zoo was the place to be around Easter because each year they hosted a very popular Easter egg hunt. As you can see here, 6,000 eggs were to be found. And you have to imagine that it took some time for the animals to learn how to be on stage all day. The very first day the zoo opened, the mouse and the hickory dickory dot clock bit 2 different kids. So the paper said the animal was removed for observation, so there would be no mice in the clock the next day. I read later on that they ended up using white rats as the mice. And whatever you do, don't get in the way of a hungry burro, especially Frosty the burro. A month after the zoo opened, the zookeepers couldn't keep Frosty fed fast enough. He gobbled down a young lady's ice cream cone and nipped her finger, leading the zoo to caution children that feed the burro ice cream may get frostbitten. One thing I learned in my research is that Storyland Zoo was pretty much a satellite zoo for Potawatomi. Storyland's animals were all transported back to Potawatomi in the wintertime as the zoo completely closed down during those months. This headline cracked me up. They used to time the births of young lion and bear cubs right around opening season of Storyland Zoo so they'd be all little and cute for the kids. The lions at Potawatomi Zoo were kept separate until that perfect time for them to mate. Well, one night a vandal slipped into Potawatomi Zoo, opened the gate, and started the process a bit too early for the lions. So when the lion cubs were born, they were a bit too big for the kids at Storyland Zoo. In the early 1970s, there were new federal regulations for zoos, and at the time, Potawatomi Zoo was not the zoo that we know today. The whole zoo needed a major overhaul to comply with these new regulations. There were a few recommendations to concentrate the efforts of the city on one zoo and either close Storyland or close Potawatomi. At the time, they invested in Potawatomi and left Storyland open. Not for too much longer, however, as it was decided in 1981 that Storyland Zoo would close its doors forever. Popularity and attendance throughout the 1970s dwindled, and at the time the city was in the middle of a financial crunch, so it was decided to close the zoo. There really didn't seem to be much of an uproar out of the community, as they all knew that times had changed and it was the right decision. Soon after the closing, it was announced that the cages in the old Storyland Zoo would be great to use as a wildlife rehabilitation center, and it served the community in that role until 1994 when Indiana DNR shut it down. I think after a while, the care of all those injured wild animals just got to be a bit too much for the nonprofit organization. And now, a brief word from one of our sponsors. I want to thank the Mishawaka Historical Museum for helping to support our content. And folks, I couldn't be more happier to help support them and to speak the good word about the museum. The Mishawaka Historical Museum is located at 121 South Main Street in Mishawaka, just south of the Lincoln Way and Main Street intersection. I highly recommend that our listeners visit, and I promise that you'll learn something new about our area's history. When you first walk in, you'll be impressed with how bright and clean the museum is. Then you'll realize that the burger and fries you just ate cost more than the entrance fee to the museum. Heck, the fries alone probably cost more than the entrance fee at this point. For $5, you'll experience what is, hands down, the most comprehensive collection of artifacts and historical background, all specific to Mishawaka. You will learn tons from the artifacts and corresponding information. You'll learn how important early industry was to Mishawaka, Cam and Schellinger Brewery, Ball Band, and Dodge Manufacturing, to name a few. You'll find out about famous Mishawakans, including professional baseball player Freddie Fitzsimmons or Coach Marvin Wood, the coach depicted in the movie Hoosiers, who coached at Mishawaka High School as well. Speaking of Mishawaka schools, there's a whole section dedicated to the history of schooling in Mishawaka, including some real neat old uniforms, banners, and photographs. Speaking of photographs, the museum contains one of a kind pictures depicting a variety of Mishawaka subjects, each with a caption explaining more about it. In the military heritage section, you'll learn about Mishawaka's role over the years in helping to keep our country free. In the historic landmarks section, you'll see some amazing pictures and artifacts from historical Mishawaka landmarks, some still standing and some that were sadly lost to time. There's a whole section dedicated to the importance of churches and religion to the city. And if you ever have any questions about any of the artifacts or information the museum contains, Pete DeKeever, the president and curator of the museum, is an absolute treasure trove of knowledge about Mishawaka, and he is right there to answer any questions you have or to provide more background to any of the museum's artifacts. Again, folks, I highly encourage you to visit the Mishawaka Historical Museum. You don't need to plan an all-day visit. 1 or 2 hours is all that you need to experience everything that I mentioned above. They're open Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. Bring your $5 entrance fee, $3 for children 6 to 18, or free for 5 and younger, to experience a local gem of a place at 121 South Main Street, just south of the Lincoln Way and Main Street intersection. When you stop in, tell them that you heard about the museum on our podcast. Again, I'm very excited to be spreading the good word and encouraging you all to visit. To learn more, visit their website at www.mishawakamuseum.org. And now, back to our episode. Now, anyone who was on the History and Memories of Michiana Facebook page, follows me on Twitter, or has watched any of our other videos knows that I love checking out what remnants of our past are still visible in our area today. So I had to get out there to Rum Village and investigate. Again, thank you to Gary Harrington, the director of the Rum Village Nature Center, and all of the other park patrons for putting up with this crazy guy walking around the park taking videos. Folks who are familiar with Rum Village know that there is basically one street, a one-way street, that is literally a circle around the park. Most folks driving around that circle would have no clue that they were driving past what was once a very popular children's zoo. If you're walking around Rum Village today and looking for any remnants or reminders of Storyland Zoo, you won't find much at all. You'll find this sign here that's tucked near the dog park, which also used to be Safetyville, another episode idea and rabbit hole to dive in, with only one paragraph noting all that used to exist here. But of course, if you're crazy like me and spend some of your free time researching, taking pictures, and exploring, there are still a few, very few and very hidden remnants left. As you have seen multiple times throughout this video, the entrance to that zoo, the colorful, often photographed building, is way lost to history. And holy moly, you would have no clue where it once stood. Here is a video with on-the-scene, groundbreaking reporting by yours truly. The playground area, pavilions, all of that is to the right there. But I guarantee the majority of those people hanging out there have no clue. Literally, right through those woods was Storyland Zoo. That neat entrance was right where that do not enter sign was. It was right behind there. And that light buried in the woods, from what I can gather, was for the main entrance building. Here's a parking lot here. Folks would park there. There's parking lots beyond there. And they literally would cross the street. And you could still see a little sidewalk right here. as one of the entrances. And there's that light again. Both my parents and my in-laws are right in the age of folks who Storyland Zoo was built for. They were born in the mid-1950s, so their memories of the zoo should be right about in its heyday. And when I asked them about the zoo, they mentioned the animals, they mentioned their parents making them stop and pose for pictures, but they also speak of the zoo train with much reverence and how fun it was, weaving between the park's trees and going up and down and over the hills, just like you can see in the Limbert family video. The train hasn't ran for well over 40 years, and the bulk of where the tracks once were is in a beautiful section of the park that is part of the disc golf course now. This train house stood for years after the zoo closed and was torn down at some point in the last 10 or 15 years, I'd say. That was obviously a relic from the zoo, but now there is hardly anything. But if you look close enough, back in that direction was Storyland Zoo. Built later on, that area was Safetyville there, now a dog park. But you could see the train tracks must have come up from there. Or the old asphalt where the train tracks were 70 years ago. And it kind of hooks around this tree here. There they are right there still. And down into there, and they seem to disappear. It's crazy because when we disc golf in the late 90s, the remnants of the tracks were way more visible and prominent, and now you can barely find them. There is one last relic from Storyland Zoo in Rum Village Park, and I had no clue that it was still there until I was meeting with Gary Harrington, and he said that Storyland Zoo's duck pond was still there, deep in the thicket. When they were bulldozing everything else, apparently they left the cement duck pond for the native creatures of the park. Since it was so deep in the thicket, literally in the woods and way off the beaten path, he hadn't seen it in a few years. I had obviously never been to Storyland Zoo, so I had no clue where this duck pond was located. So, I busted out with my cell phone, found 2 aerials of the old zoo, and took a guess as to what would have been the duck pond. Then I headed in that direction. Luckily for me, my son used to watch Dora the Explorer nauseatingly on repeat, and I had my trusty backpack strapped tight, so I knew that my exploring skills were good. At this point, those woods are so thick that you could easily get turned around and discombobulated, so I do not recommend going in there, especially in t-shirt, shorts, and tennis shoes like I did. But when I discovered it, chills instantly went down my spine. That, my friends, is the old duck pond from Storyland Zoo. I mean, it is literally in the middle of woods. But all of this was once a children's petting zoo. You could see the pine tree there, which is not natural to the area. That was planted as a part of the zoo. There are several of those pine trees around. I'm standing underneath one as we speak. I had been researching the zoo, saved over 100 articles, dozens of pictures, hundreds of comments on Facebook. So needless to say, I know way more about a little children's zoo that hasn't been open in over 40 years than I should. So that's probably why when I finally found that little pond, it gave me such an eerie and chilling feeling to see. What is really nothing more than a poured cement circle, a swampy haven for the park's creatures. But I guess seeing that poured cement circle, engulfed by decades of Mother Nature doing what she does, it reminded me that regardless how much fun we have or memories that we make, time stops for nobody and life goes on. So when we're in the midst of these memory-making moments, we have to embrace them and realize how special they truly are. Thank you again for spending your valuable time watching this video. I truly hope that regardless what age you are, regardless if you have cherished memories of Storyland Zoo, or if you're simply a local history buff like I am, I hope that you learned a little something about a 25-year period in our city's history when Rum Village was the home of a magical children's zoo.